Hello world, welcome and welcome back to the channel, where today I'm coming at you with a bonus video before the month ends for a special occasion, because today I'm going to be yapping and reminiscing about my favorite childhood magical girl series. July 2006 was when the first volume of Shugo Chara released in Japan, so I absolutely had to make a draw and talk video in honor of this milestone, and I invite you to come along with me as I create some fan art and share my experiences with this franchise that has literally made me into the person I am today. So I was around 12 years old when I first started getting into Shugo Chara, having first learned about the series back in 2009. On a side note, because Amu was in the 4th grade at the start of the story the year of its release, that means the two of us were the same age contemporaneously. Anyway, at that time, I was part of a small clique of online friends who hung out on an ing website created by one of the people in the friend group, and it was through that group of friends that my eyes were opened to the magical girl genre as a whole. It all started with Tokyo Mew Mew, which very quickly consumed every aspect of my life and personality. As somebody who loved cute girly things and any character designs themed to animals or food, but was also crazy for superheroes and science fiction and shapeshifting abilities, there wasn't a more perfect gateway drug into the world of magical girls for me than a series that was essentially a love child between Strawberry Shortcake and Animorphs. Alright, but enough about Tokyo Mew Mew. This video is about Shugo Chara! That series first got introduced to me about a year later by another friend from the website, and from the first moment I got my hands on volume 1 of the manga from my local library, I was instantly and totally hooked. Even with my limited exposure to other series in the genre at this point in my life, Shugo Chara was unlike anything I had ever seen before, and once I realized that both it and Tokyo Mew Mew were part of a larger genre as a whole, and that genre had a name, a whole world of other stories that had similar themes and tropes to what I already loved so much opened up to me, with franchises like Cardcaptor Sakura and Magical Girl Lyrical Nanoha and Mermaid Melody and Wedding Peach and Sailor Moon and Polamagi Madoka Magica and Precure and Princess Tutu. From that point on, I was completely obsessed with magical girls. It's still my comfort genre to this day, and I have Shugo Chara to thank for that. I was immediately captivated by the world Peach Pit were able to create, to the point where I was literally jealous of the main characters because I wanted a guardian character of my own, and I remember rereading volume 1 over and over as I desperately wanted to get the rest of the books that were available in English at the time. This would take me a surprisingly long amount of time because that volume was the only one my library carried, so my only option if I wanted to read the books legally was buying them. I could have made my life a lot easier building up my collection if I wasn't too dumb to know where to look, because it wasn't until the following year in 2010 where I found volumes 2 in either 7 or 9 at a convenience store in Connecticut while I was on summer vacation, so I was finally able to read what happened after the first book. It wasn't until much later that I learned most bookstore chains have a manga section, so discovering this for myself and seeing the shelves stocked with Shugo Chara manga at my local Barnes & Noble one day immediately had the mind-blowing impact you might imagine. By this point, the last 3 books still had to be officially translated into English, so once I fully caught up on the manga, I was eagerly waiting for volume 10 and onward to come out. This was actually so long ago that the first 9 volumes in my collection still have the Del Rey branding on them before Kodansha picked the series up. I have all 12 volumes of the original series, plus all 4 volumes of the Shugo Chara-chan spin-off manga, and of course I've been getting the new volumes of both Shugo Chara Jewel Joker and the 20th anniversary edition re-release of the main story as they've been coming out. At the time of me making this video, only the first 2 volumes of both are officially available in English. Also, I want to use this part of the video to go on a bit of a nerdy side tangent because I actually find it so funny how for the 20th anniversary edition of the manga, one of the selling points for the English translation is that it has updated lettering in addition to the new translation. Like, is lettering really something the average consumer cares enough about for it to be highlighted as a selling point like that? I mean, I guess for readers of the official English release, it would be appreciated since the font that was used made it kind of hard to figure out how Elle's name is supposed to be spelled. But other than people who are really deep in the typography world who would appreciate how the lettering isn't done in a mixed font and the rare proper usage of crossbar eyes, but that doesn't reflect the experiences and priorities of the average reader. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up here because it made me giggle, but seriously, you don't understand how desperately I've been wishing the Shugo Chara omnibuses would get officially released stateside. Ever since Rose and Maiden's 𝚖𝚊𝚒𝚙𝚜 got licensed for a new English translation, all I wanted was for Shugo Chara to have that same kind of treatment. And heck, just having Jewel Joker by itself translated into English would be enough to make me happy, so getting both has me absolutely over the moon. Now give us official English releases of 𝚢𝚘𝚏𝚜 2020 Return while you're at it, Kodansha. Do it, you cowards! However, even combined with my struggles to find copies of the remaining 8 volumes, my friends that got me into Shugo Chara in the first place had already read the manga in its entirety through scanlations online and watching the anime, and even though I was reading through the series for the first time, they still exposed me to basically every major spoiler without thinking about it, which I'm also going to talk about here in this voiceover, so if you haven't made it past volume 4 of the original manga or volume 2 of the 20th anniversary edition, click off now and come back once you're caught up. So I think it was within the same year that I first read volume 1 that they told me about Nakihiko. I still remember it like it was yesterday. I was hanging out on the Ning site that evening when I saw that my friend had shared some fan art she found, which was a group picture of all the male guardians in the series, and when I posted a comment expressing my confusion over why Nadeshiko was there, my friend was like, "Oh yeah, Nadeshiko's a cross-dresser and she's biologically male." What? Why did you have to spoil me like that? You could have just stuck with the cover story used by the actual characters that Nagihiko is Nadeshiko's twin brother. You knew I was coming into this series for the first time. Where's your sense of phantom etiquette? From then on, I found out through those same friends about Amu learning who Nadeshiko really is during the wedding, about Utao and Kukai becoming a couple, and the whole situation with Daya and ex-Daya too. Although that spoiler wasn't revealed quite as blatantly and directly like the Nakihiko twist was, but from just examining the context of the screenshots and page scans and everything that were being circulated on the website, it was pretty easy for me to put the pieces together. Still, I was desperately hoping I was wrong and even tried to convince myself that Daya was actually a guardian character Ami gained at some point in the series. So thanks, guys! To cut them a little bit of slack, there was one pretty big plot twist I got spoiled about that had nothing to do with my friends and everything to do with how Del Rey chose to market volume 10 of the manga in their preview pages at the end of volume 9 because they just casually gave away that Boss was really Hikaru this entire time. It was clear as day without needing the context of understanding the original language the dialogue was in to understand what was going on, which I don't know who thought it was a good idea to include those specific pages and not just have the preview cut off right before that happened, but whoever they were, I hope they got fired over this. Hey, wait a minute. Main antagonist disguising his identity, who is revealed to actually be a quiet and mysterious orphan grade school boy with blonde hair and blue eyes, who manipulates old men to fulfill his master plan. Now, where have I heard that before? But now that Shugo Chara Jewel Joker is a thing, and I was reading chapters as they were being scanlated before they got officially picked up for an English release, I felt like I was the one who finally had the power this time. It's actually been a really long time since I last talked with those friends that got me into Shugo Chara, and I don't even know if they're still into it anymore. But wherever they are, I hope they're being well fed with all the new releases and merch the series has been getting. Speaking of Shugo Chara Jewel Joker, let's talk about that next. At the time of me making this video, I've read the first 15 chapters, so I'm a little ways behind, but I put it right up there with 𝚢𝚘𝚏𝚜 2020 Return as my favorite Magical Girl sequel. It's been a while since I read Cardcaptor Sakura Clear Card Arc, and even then I haven't fully caught up with it yet, but there's some stuff in it that seriously bothers me, and it smells a little sequel baity, and Mermaid Melody Aqua is just a disaster of a poorly written retcon and rewrite of the original series that never needed to exist. Of course, Jewel Joker is still ongoing, so it's a little hard for me to make objective statements about what I think so far because I don't want to risk getting jawsed, but I'm having a blast with Jewel Joker so far. I really respect and admire what Peach Pit are doing to expand on the original story's world building. Like, we got so many juicy lore drops just in the first volume alone. I love the direction the sequel is going in by taking the same core concept that was introduced in the original series and expanding upon it by looking at it from the perspective of children who are in a different stage of life than our protagonists were at the beginning, in this case in junior high, where pressure from peers and authority figures over who you're supposed to be is much higher than when you're in elementary school. And I think having this magical girls' school where guardian eggs are just handed out to the students rather than having them be born out of their own hopes and dreams really exemplifies this detail, especially since the other guardians can't purify the X-eggs like they used to, as if the X-eggs can't return to being representations of the selves their owners want to be because this matchup with children and guardian characters isn't meant to happen naturally. Rose's guardian character being purified was such a shocking and emotional scene, as not only did Annabelle disappear entirely instead of going back to Rose, but her name and design are entirely different from what she was truly supposed to be when she was with Rose all this time, which is so sad. Speaking of the new characters, Kiyomi and Kurumu are probably my favorites, or the ones that have appeared so far. I absolutely love characters like Kiyomi who are such high and mighty sticks in the mud who have to deal with a crazy situation that they're unable to dominate but still try and fail to convince everyone else they have a handle on the situation. That gets me just about every time. Kurumu is also a fascinating character, and it's been so exciting to see her gradually develop and unfold. I can't wait to see where she ends up by the end of the story. I'm also really curious about what the deal is with both the headmaster and Nia. The headmaster is extremely sus, and there's so much conspicuous overlap between Nia and Ikuto that has to be addressed at some point within the story, right? One of my biggest hopes for Jewel Joker was that the adults from the first series would play a role in the new story too. So I was really happy to see Nikaido get his time in the limelight. Not only that, we even got to see his guardian character again! And he has a name now!
It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life!
On the negative side though, one of the biggest complaints I have is that Hikaru is still in a leadership position over at Easter. That took me out of the story aggressively. Like, what happened to raising him as a normal boy? He reminds me of my favorite Clock Tower character. Of course I'm going to be viciously protective of him by proxy. Also, I know many people weren't happy with the way Utao was handled, and it felt like the creators were walking back on the character development she got in the original series, but I don't know, I'm fine with this, and I personally think seeing her act this way after everything that happened makes a lot of sense, since she's done everything she did to obtain Ikuto's freedom, and now he's finally untethered from Easter. I can 100% buy her still being overprotective of him in order to preserve the freedom he had been denied for so long, especially now that there's all this funkiness going on with Yoru after Ikuto lost him that he needs to get to the bottom of. Overall, I'm really enjoying Jewel Joker so far. I always get so hyped whenever a new chapter drops, and I can't wait to see where it goes from here. I think it's a very worthy sequel to the original manga, and I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. I can't wait for volumes 3 and 4 to come out in English after this video goes up. You better believe I'm gonna be all over them like white on rice. Of course, it's not just the Shugo Chara manga I'm crazy about collecting. From the moment I got into the series, I wanted to get my hands on basically all of the toys, most of which were brand new when I first joined the fandom that have now been marked up by scalpers on the secondhand market, and I deeply regret not prioritizing saving up for and buying some of these toys first back when they were more affordable. I had limited allowance money, and I was also an avid collector of Figmas and Nendroids around the same time I got into Shugo Chara, so the Figmas ended up winning the war of priority as far as which little trinkets I would collect, but the fact that I could have gotten the Dekorechu dolls of Amu and Emulate Heart as their MSRP is something I have not and will not ever forgive myself for, and they have consistently been at the top of my Daiso list for the past 17 years. However, I did achieve a small victory by acquiring the complete set of Wave 2 trading figures at a really good price. The one that has Rima, Amulet Angel, Lunatic Charm, Sweater Amu, and the different variations of those figures, and I'm still holding out hope that someday I'll experience similar good fortune obtaining the Wave 1 set. Likewise, I own the first art book, but I remain on the lookout for a good deal on the second art book that's in good condition. The only other pieces of retro merch I wanted back then that I haven't been able to get my hands on yet are the mascot keychains of the Guardian characters, although I've mostly lost all hope by this point of ever being able to find an affordable listing for them. I've been loving the new merch we've been getting too, especially since this merch goes beyond the usual stock image cam badges and acrylic standees and includes actual toys and figures, and really especially since some of this merch is also being imported. You can probably imagine my reaction when a Nendroid of Amu had been shadow dropped on the Good Smile Company website. TLDR, I went absolutely feral. I've never pre-ordered something that quickly in my entire life. Now I'm just praying with all my body and soul that I can find some really amazing deal for the Kotobukiya figures that are coming out. I mentioned earlier that I was really into collecting Figmas around the same time I first got into Shugo Chara, and in particular I was absolutely fascinated by the modding community and seeing how people were able to sculpt or repaint their figures into completely different characters. And since I was huge into Shugo Chara, but there were no Figmas for it, I wanted to get into this hobby so I could make customs of the cast. I vividly remember how obsessive I was about following others in the community online, reading articles about how to recast and sculpt new parts, planning different techniques to add the eyes to the faces, and scrounging together found objects that I could use to create props for the specific characters I want to make, like a paintbrush handle or some toy bowling pins for 𝚖𝚒𝚒𝚘𝚎 and Clown Drop's weapons. Unfortunately, my endeavors of making custom Shugo Chara Figmas never went past beyond me scavenging for these scrap materials that would be used as props, but the intent was still there. One area where Shugo Chara made more of a lasting impression on me artistically was getting me interested in art in general. And longtime viewers will know that this series was what inspired me to learn how to draw and to make my own manga. The visual presentation of the manga was a huge pull for me. I loved how the art style could balance being really cute and detailed as well as super exaggerated and emotive. Up until that time, I hadn't seen too many other series where the characters looked really elegant and adorable while also pulling off some of these crazy facial expressions, which was really refreshing, especially in a series aimed at girls. I was obsessed with Peach Pit's page layout as well, not just in the way they structured their panels, but how they chose to draw those panels as well, sometimes by having the borders be decorative shapes instead of black lines, or only having a pattern express the panel rather than drawing a solid geometric shape and filling that in up to the borders. If you want to see this inspiration in full display, check out my playlist where I upload episodes of my own webcomics here on YouTube. I was also inspired by seeing how the artists work together. If you don't know, Peach Pit are made up of two artists and they split the duties of what they'll draw amongst each other, with one artist doing the storyboard, the other artist doing the layout, then one artist drawing the character's eyes and hair, and another handling the faces and the rest of the body, and it all comes together to make the final artwork feel really cohesive. This sparked a lifelong dream of collaborating on a story with another person that I still have to this day. I just think the camaraderie that comes with being able to work together on a project with a good friend must be such a fun experience. In general, Peach Pit became my artist role model. I wanted to draw just like them, color just like them, structure my manga panels just like them, pose my characters just like them. You get the idea. Even when looking at other works created by Peach Pit, like for example, I've recently been reading the new Rose and Maiden Collector's Edition omnibuses, and I felt like I was rediscovering an ancient tablet from which my art style was derived. The entire time I was having moments of, oh right, I used to draw hands the same way they did. This is what inspired me to draw faces. Things like that. It was kind of a surreal experience, but a very enjoyable one nonetheless. Shugo Chara also caused a shift in how I would develop my OCs, giving me a newfound prioritization towards giving characters an unusual personality trait that you wouldn't expect them to have based on their usual presentation. I vividly remember being heavily impacted by Nadeshiko's character changes in this regard. I even made a lot of fan art and fanfiction for Shugo Chara back then, which for me feels like such a big deal since I'm not really a fan art person. Most of the time when I consume media, it just inspires me when developing my own art and stories. So when it gets to a point where I start drawing a lot of fan art for a particular series, that's the biggest sign that I really like it. For as much as I'm fangirling over Shugo Chara like a nerd, I feel like it's important for me to acknowledge that I won't pretend this series doesn't have some major flaws, especially and specifically in regard to the relationship dynamics, because mamma mia, there are some spicy meatballs. I actually felt this way from the very beginning of me getting into this series because 𝚖𝚑𝚤 was hate at first sight for me. I never liked the bad boy archetype to begin with, so right away he wasn't winning any points with me there. But his dynamic with Amu was such a huge nope for me, not even counting the fact that she's still in grade school and he's pushing 20. To make things even worse, 𝚖𝚑𝚤 was my best friend's Oshi, the same friend who introduced me to Shugo Chara to begin with, and Amuto was her OTP, so you can imagine how that made things a little frosty between us. His backstory also bugs me. It feels like tragic for the sake of it being tragic. Like, instead of explaining how he ended up as the character he is today, it feels more like a systematic exculpation of all the negative traits to make the characters, and by extension the readers, feel guilty for not liking him. Not to yuck anyone's yum, but I'm glad that nowadays it's easier to find more 𝚖𝚑𝚤 haters, just because back when Shugo Chara was still new, you'd be treated like a leper if you didn't like him or weren't an Amuto shipper. To be fair, I wasn't very diplomatic when expressing my dislike for this character or this pairing, but honestly, I think part of that was me acting out because I was so sick of people saying I was stupid for not being an 𝚖𝚑𝚤 fan, and there was nobody else I could go to who also didn't like him. Ironically, now that I'm not having to deal with as many partisan 𝚖𝚑𝚤 apologists anymore who've been grating on my nerves, I've begun to appreciate and warm up to him a little more. Emphasis on a little. I already made a passing reference to Clock Tower earlier, so I might as well keep the train going by bringing Jennifer and Nolan into the mix. I hate to say it, but the two of them look downright wholesome in comparison to Amuto.
You made some powerful enemies, son.
Even though this is another icky age gap ship that I condemn, and I appreciate how neither the game nor the novel adaptation made an attempt to romanticize this very boundary-violating relationship, I think Amuto and certain other ships from different magical girl series I've cut my teeth on have desensitized me to Janolan a little bit. If I'm being honest, I'm not really a fan of any of the canon Shugo Chara pairings. Amuto is just the one that's the most egregious to me because it's the main and most popular ship and the one that bothers me the most. But in general, I feel like Peach Pit are really good at writing individual characters and having them play off each other as an ensemble, but having those characters be romantically involved isn't one of their strong suits. I mean, there was one really cute scene between Rima and Nagihiko and Jewel Joker that warmed me up to them a little bit, but still, I never really bought into their relationship. They just don't seem like they have a lot of chemistry. Maybe I was just feeling a little protective of Nagihiko because he was my favorite character, and at the time I shipped him with Amu. Now I'm a Kukamu truther, so seeing him paired with my least favorite character kind of stung. I never liked Rima or Kairi as a kid, so I was hoping that by rereading the manga as an adult, I would warm up to them more. And while that did happen with Kairi, mostly because I liked the voice the translators gave him in the updated 20th anniversary edition manga, although I do think his crush on Amu was really out of left field, Rima still bugs me! That being said, while we're on the topic of Kairi, I do really like his dynamic with Yaya, although I think that has less to do with any sort of shipping and more with me enjoying how much the two of them plus Hikaru play off each other as a trio. Utao and Kukai's romance always felt kind of superfluous too. It's almost like they only became a couple just by process of elimination after the writers shipped off the rest of the cast, and honestly I think the relationship would work just as well if it remained platonic. And don't even get me started on Utao's relationship with 𝚖𝚑𝚤. Like, I understand that Utao has been screwed up by Aesir's manipulation, which results in her having a parasocial relationship with her brother, and I know incest is a topic that gets soapified a lot in shoujo manga, but still, this just feels like a bridge too far and only exists to create shock value and fan service. There could have been a more tactful way to show both Utao's childish side and her starting point when she's still entangled with the enemy, you know? Also, as much as I adore Nagihiko, there are some parts involving him that are uncomfortable too. I think the scene everyone thinks of first is the changing room scene in Volume 2, which, yeah, that probably should have been left out. All this to say, while I am overjoyed that the original series is getting a new lease on life in the West through the 20th anniversary translation, and Jewel Joker, and the merch that's getting imported, part of me is scared that this new audience who will be discovering the series for the first time will see some of these moments and will just be like, ew, brother, ew, then just totally cancel it and its fans outright. Which I think is sad, because on the one hand, they're totally valid for not wanting to touch the series again because of these issues, as not everyone can overlook them so easily. But on the other hand, I think the good this series does far outweighs the bad, and it would be a shame if people missed out on what it had to offer because they just wrote it off without a second thought. And while this isn't nearly as big of an issue as some of the other flaws in this series, I feel like Volume 5 was the weakest one of the original manga. Like, there were some good and important plot developments that happened, but for the most part it felt like it meandered way too much. Can you tell I'm a manga only person because I'm not complaining at all about the amount of filler episodes the anime had and about Igato being put on a bus? So at this point, I've done a lot of yapping about how much I love Shugo Chara, but haven't gone into enough detail about why I do. Like, why did this series have such a chokehold on me compared to other magical girl franchises? Why was I so invested in the story that I cared about avoiding spoilers? Why did I want to collect toys of the characters like Christopher Guest collects beach balls? Why is this story still so important to me despite having some elements that are difficult to defend? So I really had to do a lot of thinking about this and overanalyze every single little trope and detail that stood out for me and attempt to articulate why I like them so much. And here's what I was able to come up with. Like I mentioned before, this manga was what gave magical girls a name for me. Prior to that, I knew that Shugo Chara and Tokyo Mew Mew both had something in common, something that I really liked, but I didn't know if that something was only unique to these two series, and learning that they were part of a larger genre opened me up to so many more stories that I fell in love with, thus beginning my lifelong obsession with magical girls. Shugo Chara was one of the first anime and manga series I got into that wasn't as heavily localized as some of the other Japanese media I had been into up to that point, so it ended up being a major player in my weeaboo awakening. But going beyond that emotional stuff and taking a more analytical deep dive, the premise and the power system I think were the biggest draw for me, and I think there's a certain quality Shugo Chara has that I don't see very commonly in other magical girl series, where the magic the characters have actually changes something about them directly. In this case, how they outwardly express their true selves, rather than just giving them access to a frilly costume and elemental powers to beat up the villains with. The characters gain their powers from a change that occurs within them through self-actualization rather than through some force of destiny to save the universe that's thrust upon them, and how they still have access to their abilities whether they're transformed or not. I think the specific idea of the magic system changing the person who has the powers is also the reason why Nagihiko was my favorite character growing up. Not just because long-haired pretty boys are my kryptonite, although that's definitely a major contributing factor, but seeing the exact same character presented in two different forms, expressing themselves in very different ways while reconciling and acknowledge their previous self even in the role of their more authentic self, and taking on new duties within a group they were once a part of for so long, really clicked with me on some deeper level. I also really love how the powers were treated as their own characters, which really made the story a lot more engaging than if they were just artifacts or elements or what have you. Now that I think about it, Rose and Maiden follow a similar formula, so I guess Peach Pit just really liked this trope. On top of that, this world and the magic it contained just felt so accessible. I love the idea of all children having an egg in their heart, and the guardian characters being treated as a rite of passage or a common human experience that anyone could have. Really made it feel more open and inclusive compared to other series where the protagonist's powers are very situational, only being used to save the day from an imminent threat. I'm finding out more and more that I really like stories where the fantasy aspect of it puts a spin on a common childhood or life experience in general. In this case, taking the Japanese approach at calling someone who's a rookie or has the makings of being a professional in their field an egg of that thing and viewing it through this fantastical lens, rather than crafting this more grand, epic, esoteric approach to the fantasy, you know? I find that this kind of approach makes the story and its power system feel a lot more engaging and inviting. Like, if you knew where to look or were in the right place at the right time, you could hatch a guardian egg, or become a Mew Mew, or capture all the cloud cards too. The same logic extends to the more mundane aspects of the story too, as I really appreciate how, rather than the main character having to find all of her fellow magical girls in order to form a team, and all the characters meeting each other for the first time as they join the crew, because technically the story is already doing a version of that with Amu hatching all of her guardian eggs. Instead, when Amu learns about the other guardians, even though she's meeting them for the first time, everyone else has known each other as friends prior to their first appearance in the story, and just that little detail of entering this already established inner world where everyone has a history with each other and finding her place as a newcomer was something I liked. Building off that point, I love how the story is structured in such a way where the first chapters are about the main characters discovering her powers and figuring out how this magic system works, rather than kicking things off in the beginning with a mission to purify monsters and stop the villains. Again, so many times in Magical Girl series, the powers only exist for the purpose as weapons with which to fight the enemy, but we don't spend a lot of time seeing other applications of this magic outside of fighting, so having Shugo Chara break out of this mold is something I love to see. Another huge part of the manga that resonated with me, and that I wish other Magical Girl series did more often, is how every single character is important and makes a mark in the story, even the ones that usually get left on the sidelines in these kinds of series. Amu's classmates and family members get their time in the spotlight, and other adults like Nobuko, Tsukasa, Nikaido, Yukari, and Hoshina are given a lot of attention, and if they were taken out of the story, their absence would definitely be felt. Nikaido is probably my favorite out of all of them. I just love the balance Peach Pit were able to strike of having this sopping, wet, pathetic failure of a man also be a genuine villain of the same time. It really made an impact on me. Nobuko is a great character too. I absolutely love her. We stand a plus-sized middle-aged woman in a girly pop Magical Girl series who actually plays a major role in the plot and is an ally to the main characters. Yes, queen, go off! It's always been a pet peeve of mine when grown-ups are conspicuously absent in stories marketed or geared towards kids, so I appreciate how Shugo Chara not only gives adults something to do, which makes the story feel more structured, but makes them fleshed out characters in their own right. One scene that really stood out to me, which illustrates this point, is how Nikaido drives all the guardians over to the Easter building in order to save Ikuto and is having everyone check with their parents to make sure that they can be out this late at night. There's just something about these kids with special powers and normal adults who are otherwise on the periphery being in on the secrets of this fantasy world, and the adults using their resources to help the kids reach their goal. On top of that, I really appreciate the kids versus adult message that the story conveys and how it enhances the main premise about discovering your true self and fulfilling your hopes and dreams. Where you have our young, idealistic main characters who are still trying to figure out who they are and what they want to be against these older and more cynical, street-smart adults who take these embodiments of what young children want to be deep inside and twist them into something according to their agendas. I feel like in most Magical Girl series, it's pretty common to have the villain team be more advanced in age than the heroines, although again the only other Magical Girl series I was into before I discovered Shugo Chara was Tokyo Mew Mew, and the aliens and St. Rose Crusaders were all in the same age group as the protagonists. So Shugo Chara was where I first saw this kind of dichotomy play out. Even then, compared to Magical Girl series I discovered later on that had that same good versus evil / kids versus adult conflict such as Sailor Moon and Magic Knight Rayearth, I feel like the villains being significantly older than the heroes didn't really leave that big of a mark on the larger narrative, and for the most part they just relied on dark magic to fight. But in Shugo Chara's case, the villains being at a later stage in life really is intertwined with their tactics, with how they do business and furthering their schemes. And when you compare characters like Nikaido, Yukari, and Hoshina to the younger members of Easter like Ikuto, Utao, and Kairi, you can really see those differences play out by repurposing the ideal selves of young children through a very corporate instrument, and how there's a clear divide between between Easter and the Guardians, which makes the whole story and these characters that much more fun to read. There's no token male characters either, as Shugo Chara is one of the earliest and most visible examples of including magical boys who are treated as more than just a throwaway gag, which meant a lot to me personally, growing up as someone who loved girly pop media but usually related to and identified more with the male characters in various cartoons I watched during my formative years. Everyone is treated equally here, and I really love that. It's also a lot of fun seeing magical girls get different transformations other than just upgrades from their base form. I know this isn't quite as novel a magical girl trope as I think it is, since other series like Correct Your Yui and Pre-Tier have done the same thing, but I'm still a sucker for it. What makes Shugo Chara's version of this trope even more special is how different characters can character change or character transform with another person's guardian characters, and how this results in real-world consequences when this causes the guardian to run out of stamina more quickly, which I think is a really clever way to address the real-world fatigue of acting like someone you aren't that we can all relate to. Another detail that I think I was only subconsciously aware of until now, but still appreciated a great deal, was how the story is plotted in such a way where there are no coincidences. I've heard it said before that in writing, you can get away with having a coincidence start the story, but not with ending the story. And while I believe this is true, if you can find a way to not have the story begin with a coincidence either, that's even better. And I think Shugo Chara pulls this off beautifully. Well, okay, maybe later on Hikaru's appearances before the big reveal of him being the CEO of Easter are a little too convenient, but putting that aside, looking at the very beginning of the story, you really get a sense of how Amu has been attending Seiyo Academy for months, and she's fed up with her public persona having a life of its own, which is making her more open to the ideas being promoted on Nobuko's show, and how this directly leads to her gaining her guardian characters, which sets the gears of the story in motion. Another aspect of the plot and world building that I love, and that I really wish more stories did by default, is how as the story progresses, new conflicts and drama arise not by tossing in a bunch of new lore for the characters to make sense of, but instead finding ways to look at the pre-existing rules of magic from different angles, which really helps make the story feel more contained without overcomplicating the power system to ridiculous levels, which is an easy trap for a long-running magical girl series to fall into. Believe it or not, there's actually a lot more detail I could go into about all the things I love about this series, but I try my best just to focus on its unique elements that didn't overlap too much with other magical girl series, because I actually have a separate video in the works where I talk about both Shugo Chara and Tokyo Mew Mew and compare it to a certain much more popular magical girl IP. So if you're interested in that, make sure you're subscribed so you can tune into that video once it's ready and released. Or if you're here from the future, then you can click on the card in the corner to check that video out. Anyway, that's going to be it for my very long-winded speed paint and commentary about everything I love about Shugo Chara. I hope you enjoyed watching or listening along, and that maybe this video made you feel a little nostalgic if you're a fan of this series too. If you are, feel free to share some of your favorite memories with Shugo Chara down below, because I'd love to read them. Now that we've reached the end of this video, it's finally time for me to shut it down. Make sure to give Boba cats and pats, snacks, and playtime before you log out, and head to the description of this video to find links for every other corner of cyberspace I'm on. Funding for this channel was provided by my Patreon and Ko-fi members. If you enjoy my creations and want to see more from me, then consider joining for as low as $1 a month. Thanks for letting me chat with you, and until next time, Atashi no kokoro on Roku!